again. We have like a strong community going here. This is exciting. So just to do some intros, I'm Amanda. I'm the founder and CEO of Five Old now, but the former AP Human Geography teacher that's putting my Ms. D cap on these days. And I'll pass it off to our awesome hosts for tonight to introduce themselves.
Awesome. Hi, guys. I'm Kushi. I'm a sophomore, so I took AP Human last year, and I'm going to be covering Unit 5 Agriculture today.
Hey guys, I'm Emily. I'm currently a junior. I'm from Minnesota, and I will be covering Unit 6 today.
Woo! Unit 5 and 6. This is going to be a good time. All right, I'm going to share my screen so you can see the slides. And just to get us all acquainted again, you can hit the button below to follow along on these slides. These slides, as we did yesterday, we have made some changes on some of these slides. So that means the review packet is a little bit off. But that doesn't mean that the review packet isn't useful. You should still use it. It just may not be like perfectly aligned to what we're talking about. Instead, you could try taking notes in other ways. We'll talk about in a second. Kushi, do you want to give us a sense of what to expect for the next couple days?
Yeah, so today we're going over Unit 5 and 6, and then tomorrow is going to be Unit 7, and like kind of the big, almost most important and focused on topics. We're going to be covering those tomorrow night, and then May 3rd is going to be the grand finale, where we're going to go over the most important topics from every single lesson on May 3rd, the night before your guys' AP Human exam. And if you want to watch any of the previous videos from any of the previous crams, units 1 to 2 and 3 to 4, you can find them in Crowdcast as well.
Awesome. All right, a couple things to note. So we've kind of been sharing these things as we go, but how to make the most of a cram finale. So you are all on night 3, so you're basically pros at this point. But it is definitely useful to take notes. It keeps you active, but don't try to write everything down. That would make you stressed out even more. Instead, try just writing out reminders to yourself. Like, for example, a T chart that's just like a list of things that you heard us talk about that you're like, I feel good about these. I don't need to study that. And a list of things that you heard us talking about that you're like, I'm going to need to go back to that. That can be really useful. Or like mnemonics, things like that. It's a to-do list. Yeah, that's going to be really helpful. The other thing is the Cram Hub, all the slides, the replays, the review packet, everything you need is in that big green button. I honestly could not make it bigger if I tried. So if you need something, just click there. The chat is like our group chat. This is for sharing tips, tricks, and to participate when we ask questions. It's definitely useful to just, keep us talking about human geo and AP. And anytime you see people in the purple, those are our hosts. And then the last thing is the Q&A tab. If you have any questions, post questions there and check the comments because we're answering all those questions there as well. And yes, we will take breaks. And yes, the replay will be available. One of those, like, no matter how many times we tell you. Emily, will you talk through the community agreements?
Yeah, this is just something to remember while we're in the chat. Let's be supportive of each other. Let's lift each other up. Make sure that we're being kind to everyone, being patient, and just really using the chat to our benefits to hype each other up and just make sure that we're really using it for AP Human Geo so that we can all just help review the content and sharing tips and tricks like that.
Love it. Yeah, just don't forget, we're real people. We're doing our best to help you. So anything that we can do to help you, we're working hard behind the scenes on. And the last thing is the I don't know if we have all that many submissions yet. When we did this a couple years ago, we had a lot of submissions. So I'm expecting more this week. But now's your shot. So we're in it. We're in Cram Week. If at any point this week you post on Instagram or TikTok about your Cram experience, you can see a bunch of examples of people who have done this in the past too. But we're going to be selecting a bunch of winners. We'll send you $100, which is the price of a AP exam if you had to pay for it in total. But you just get $100. So either we're reimbursing you for your test or I don't know, kickstarting your summer, whatever, however you want to see it. You can spend it all on candy for all I care. But if you could post about your cram finale, that would be awesome. All right. Let's get into it. Unit 5. Emily, thank you so much. We'll see you for Unit 6, but first, Unit 5. First, I wanted to share this GIF with you because it's just on point. Oh, man. How do you feel about Unit 5, Cushy? What do you like about it?
I really enjoyed like learning the types of like farmings that are specific to each like region around the world. I found it like really cool to see how like each civilization utilized the resources they like had with them currently in order to like ensure prosperity for themselves and future generations.
Totally. I'm just like, I eat food every day, and it's like so helpful to know like where it came from and how these like businesses work. It's like a whole part of it's just like we take it for granted, right? Like you just like I just literally ordered Uber Eats to like bring me a burger, but like like what all actually went into that, and the fact that you can like go to the grocery store and get it's like I don't know, it's just kind of mind blowing when I think about it. So that's kind of just like high level. But why don't you just kind of like lay the groundwork for us? Like why agriculture? What is this about?
Yeah, so I know a lot of people ask the question like, why do we learn about agriculture in like AP Human Geography? What does it have to do with geography? But essentially, like civilizations from the start of time have used the resources that are local to their native like geography and their landscape in order to like cultivate their lives and like what they do for a living. And so agriculture has been an essential part of our society for as long as we can remember, before we like figured out, we can plant seeds, we can do this. We were like traveling in small groups with animals, like through like wherever they took us. We were kind of at the animals' mercy. We kind of just followed them. But then when we realized that we can plant seeds and we can cultivate our own food, that gave us the opportunity to settle down and like build a foundational life right where we are. And we did that by using the resources we have with our local geography. So it very much is relevant to AP Human Geo.
Totally. And we've come a long way as like humans, like a long, long, long way. Like I'm, pressing the button on my phone and ordering a burger, but it wasn't always like that. So we will talk through 3 agricultural revolutions with you because there are 3 major points. And just like we did last night, this is not a history test, but the history is context for you. So what is this first agricultural revolution? What was life like before, and then what was life like after?
So the first agriculture revolution is essentially like learning about agriculture, like, hey, we can do this. Beforehand, we had like nomadic lifestyles where there were like hunters and gatherers, people like searching for food, following the life of where animals took them. And so they were like actively like leaving. They didn't even have a house to leave. They were just like going wherever, the wind took them. And so with the first agricultural revolution, humans started to realize that we can plant seeds and we can grow our own crops. Now, these crops also feed our animals, which entices them to actually stay with us. So because of this, we learn that now we no longer have to like, constantly like reshift our lives and move like every season. Instead, we can settle down and grow life right where we are. So during the first agricultural revolution, we started something called subsistence farming, where we were able to farm enough to cultivate lives for ourselves and our families. So we're basically living off the land, living off the geography that is provided to us. So this is the first time we're also going to see like gender roles, where like it was in commonplace for like men to take care of the farms and to go ahead, and they were the ones who were like raising the crops and the cattle on the farm, where women took more traditional roles with the kids now that they didn't have to keep on moving along. And so we also started to see like private ownership, people calling like a piece of land their own, like this is now my property, because beforehand people were moving so much they didn't really like value a certain piece of land over another. But now we have the possibility. Now we can. So this first agricultural revolution is essentially learning about agriculture and saying, hey, we can do this. This is a possibility.
The private ownership thing to me is always so wild because it's like we have always had private ownership, right? Like this is my phone, this is my house, this is my, all of it. Everybody has their own thing. It's such a function of like, it's clearly so much a part of our world today. To imagine a time without private ownership is just wild, right? It's like, this is ours.
Yeah.
But for better or worse, farming. It also gave us a lot more people and a lot more technology and like, improvements in like the way in our lifestyles. And so we'll take it. That question is perfect timing because we've got the agricultural hearths. What is a hearth?
Our hearth is going to be like the starting place or the birthplace of a like innovation, an idea of growing a certain thing. It's going to be like the starting foundational block from which any like concept or notion has a chance of spreading from. So this is essentially where something is going to be like originally grown or originally started. And so I believe the question asks like, where did the first like agricultural revolution started? And so we saw them in the areas like indicated on this map. So such as like South America, near like Colombia, where like cacao and like coffee beans were like found in that area. We also saw them in Sub-Saharan Africa as people started to like use the geography of like the Saharan desert and like the savannas there in order to like grow food. We saw some in like Southeast Asia where they started to slowly utilize the like more elevation type geography in order to like grow their foods. And then some in the Native American tribes here in North America, as most of our territory and soil was extremely fertile.
It's pretty wild. It's like, despite where in the world people lived, they all got to the point of developing agriculture. It's like almost like an inevitable of like human evolution, which is pretty cool. And so it happened at different times because humans migrated to different places and had sort of been there for different lengths of time. But everybody does this, and this is where you can see on this map too, like the actual crops that they were growing.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool because they had like no connection to each other. Many of these herds, they had no means of like communication. So like the idea that all of them like figured out we can do this was like a pretty like impressive thing for back then.
Totally. It's definitely one of the like fascinating like parts of human history. And even within that, in all of those places, in all of human history too, and we added this in here because this is really important, but agriculture does involve, in a lot of times, humans changing their environment. So just because you live in this spot, if it doesn't, allow for creating the type of agricultural output that you want, you can do different things to sort of make it work better for you, but they're not necessarily good for the earth.
The environment. Yeah, it kind of goes back to the discussion of environmental determinism versus possibilism. So, like as we like advance with modern day technology and like just throughout the agricultural revolutions, we saw that humans not only just kind of like accepted like, oh, this is my geography, this is all I can do with the land that I live in. No, they started to take their ideas and kind of input it onto the physical landscape they were given and tried to utilize their vision into the land in order to produce what they needed to. So like examples of this is like terracing. And so we see terracing in like very commonly in like Southeast Asia, where the landscape is a lot more elevated and a lot more like hilly. So they decided to utilize kind of like the hills of the area, almost in a sort of notion of like stair steps, where they started a lot of wet rice farming. And so wet rice farming takes a lot of water. And for back then, this is water they could instead use like to make sanitary to drink. So it was a really big deal for them to use all this water. So by having a stair-step method, the water can kind of like drip down from level to level. So every single level of the hills can access the water in order to grow rice, because rice takes up and requires a lot of water. So terracing is an example. Another one is deforestation. Sometimes there were just too many trees, too many things in the way of a rather fertile land for humans to be able to grow. So what did we learn to do? We learned that, hey, it's possible to cut down these trees and plant. However, this is not without consequences, as we later figured out that this can cause like an increase in erosion, as like the soil is now kind of exposed to the open air and is just like at the mercy of the wind. It increases carbon dioxide because we're cutting down the trees who are trying to like pump oxygen back in the air, which is overall detrimental for climate change. Additionally, we see like the irrigation system, where in like societies where water is really scarce, they were like, how are we going to be able to plant when there's not enough water? So irrigation gave us a way to figure out how to distribute the little water we have to many plants and conserve the water for whenever we get it, when there's like a huge storm or anything, so it can last several of seasons and last when we are possibly in a drought. So this kind of really helped with like sanitation. However, it did cause a bit of land collapse because we were taking the water that is used in irrigation from the soil. So it'd make the soil extremely like shaky and volatile. The surface was no longer very reliable. So that was one of the consequences. But overall, irrigation really helped a lot of societies. And then finally, another way we have is the slash and burn method. And so the slash and burn method essentially takes, like, rather than deforestation, and we were just cutting down all the trees, some societies didn't have like the capability or like the equipment needed to like cut down trees, because it isn't like 5 to 10 trees. No, this could be like several hundred trees in like a plot of land. So the slash and burn method was a much quicker way of doing things, where they would just essentially burn all the local wildlife in the area in order to like make way for the crops that they wanted to grow based on the season. However, fires are not really a good way to go about many things. Like, this can also lead to a forest fire, and it can be much larger than originally intended, which can destroy a lot more than you originally planned. Additionally, by the act of like burning land over and over again to clear the native wildlife, you're actually ruining the fertility of the soil. So it doesn't make it as viable for years to come. So it's really detrimental to sustainability and sustainability issues. However, it was a quick and easy way for civilizations who didn't have means to like cut down trees to be able to plant what they needed.
Perfect. Yeah, so I saw some questions of just like trying to explain these again. The really easy way to remember all these is like terracing is just changing putting the crops on the hills. Deforestation is cutting down trees. Irrigation is just changing where the water goes. And slash and burn is literally burning land. So it's like, these are just 4 examples. There's other ways too. So like I said, these next 2 slides are a little bit more history, and this one is in particular a shout out to Fiveable's friend Ben Freeman at Freemanpedia. But this is an AP World chart, so don't feel like you have to know everything in this chart. This is a lot. Unless you're taking AP World, then you do. But basically, the idea is like, as we saw in the Hearths, you have agriculture appearing in different places at different times in the world. But then the diffusion of agriculture, right? The spread of agriculture happens. There's like 2 huge pieces as to why this really takes off, one of which is trade. Anything you want to add on this piece, or you want me to explain any of these other pieces?
I think the biggest thing to like, I guess, realize with this graph is like back in the first agricultural revolution, there was like really not much means of communications with other civilizations. Like, one, because we're so far away from like the other herds, And two, language wasn't exactly the same from civilization to civilization. So even if you ran into another group of people, can't exactly understand them. So this is kind of like the first time as we progress further into history where we see the interaction and the trading of crops. So this essentially means that civilizations are no longer like restrained to growing plants and crops that only their like native geography enables. It allows us to take crops from all over the world and learn how to grow it in your own native society, which can really help with like life and like living longer because it adds to more of a wholer diet. So as we got the diffusion of agriculture, we saw the life expectancy was slowly starting to increase a little bit.
Exactly. And this one is just showing trade in Afro-Eurasia, right? So Africa, Europe, and Asia. But as I saw someone already pointed out, it definitely has to do with the Columbian Exchange as well, which happens later. So that first slide is more like, 2000 plus years ago, 600 BC, like CE and on, like Silk Roads, Indian Ocean trade. And then once we get the connection of the two different continents, right, the quote unquote old world, new world, this is your Columbian Exchange. Do you want to give us a quick sense of what to know about the Columbian Exchange?
Yeah. So one thing I want you guys to really like notice is that like Colombia and like South America and most of Europe are on two really different like parts of the equator. South America is more closer to like further down the equator, and then Europe is a little bit further away from the equator. So that means the climates in each of the area allow for very different crops to be grown. And so Colombia, hence the Columbian Exchange, specialize in more tropical fruits. So we see like a lot of cash crops, especially, such as like pineapple, pumpkins, and like a lot of what we consider like exotic fruits, even today, being grown closer down to the equator in Colombia because the weather was much more suitable for this kind of cultivation there. And then in Europe, we saw a lot of like cattle. There was more cattle in Europe than there was in Equator because again, that's what Europe kind of was able to cultivate a little bit more over South America. And so during the Columbian Exchange, two completely different societies were able to exchange goods that each of them were able to separately create to each other, which allowed for a huge diffusion of concepts, of ideas, of food. And so, because of this, both sides of the parties are actually exposed to a lot more things than just agriculture. They are finding like newer and faster ways to like think about things. Because, for an example, Europe, one of the things it brought over to Colombia was horses. And for a lot of people in South America, they had not seen a horse up until this point. It was kind of like a little confusing when they saw this creature at first. And then same thing for Europeans seeing like exotic fruits like pineapple. It's not exactly the first thing they think of. So with the diffusion of agriculture, especially in the Columbian Exchange, it was the first time where we saw different like climates really exchanging goods that were way different than each other.
Perfect. And just one point of clarification is that Colombia is part of the Americas, but the Columbian Exchange is really about these massive regions. So just think of it as like the Americas, Europe, Asia is also very much part of it, and Africa. And so one of the things to note is like you get all of these foods that are like spreading across the world. It also really impacts the culture of that place, right? Like think about how much we relate pizza to Italy, right? Like food is culture, right? Like it is so much attached to who we are. Pizza could not have been created before the Columbian Exchange in Europe because they didn't have tomatoes, or like you think about like coffee as being such an important staple in the Americas, and like same thing, right? And so it's so connected to culture. It's so connected to also like the religion that's transferring, the ideas that are transferring, also of course disease that's transferring. So in this case, it's like such an important moment of diffusion with so many things going across the world. and all of which are really increasing the population. So this is just like another piece, is just like as soon as anytime food like this is transferring, the population everywhere increases. Even like, Africa, obviously there are slaves that are being taken from people who are enslaved, who are being taken from Africa, but they are the percentage of the population in Africa is still increasing as a whole. All right. You guys are doing good with this history. So jumping forward to the second agricultural revolution, the Industrial Revolution, is when more things are going to change. It's all just about like the speed of stuff, like really increasing. All right, why don't you give us a snapshot of the Industrial Revolution?
Yeah. So if we want to connect this again to a bigger AP human concept, second agriculture revolution, otherwise known as the Industrial Revolution, is when we're going to really see stage 2 of the DTM model hitting off. It is going to be, if you guys remember, that one stage in the graph where the population just bursts. This is it. And the agriculture revolution actually really kind of explains some of the reasons how our population was able to just grow so quickly during that period of time. And so before the second agricultural revolution, we had the kind of farming where you're only growing food for yourself and your family because you don't have like the resources or the capability or even the time to be able to grow it for other people. So the notion of kind of like making other people food and like selling it to them wasn't really talked about as common. However, during that second agricultural revolution, we saw industrialization. And so industrialization created these technological devices that made farming so much faster and so much more efficient and more like widely produced that one family did not need all this food anymore. So we could see farmers now realizing, hey, we can sell this food, we can barter it, we don't need to keep all this food anymore. So we started to see a lot more commercial farming where we started to trade food and we started to just like work with the resources we have and combine it with technology to help people and sell it to people everywhere around us. And so this led to like longer lifespans as we see in the second DTM model because we have now more access and are able to more rapidly provide food to everyone. And so this also led to the concept of urbanization as we see from the first time, where a lot of people start moving out of the rural areas where like all the farming is happening and into urban areas. And now that urban areas have the capacity to like process this food a lot more quickly. And when I say process, I mean distributed. We're able to get it out to people a lot more quicker. So now the rural areas are going to be met with the demand to keep producing this kind of food. And so in a lot of ways, this benefited and hurt some farmers. Farmers who had access to this technology were making a huge ton of money because why? They were able to produce all the food that that the people in urban areas needed. And now because of that, farmers with relatively more smaller farms were like almost in a sense forced out of their farms. They could not keep up with the technological advancements of the industrialized farmers. So we're going to see a lot of farmers now who have been farmers for like as long as they can remember go to the urban areas. Actually, this is the first time we see farmers like leaving their houses because those with smaller lands, less technology, are not able to keep up with the bigger, more industrialized farmers. So now there's going to be a lot of farmers leaving the rural areas and going working in the urban industrialized areas. So we're going to see like a really great disparity between social classes as well during this time.
Perfect. Yeah, it's like the first agricultural revolution gave us social classes. The second one made them like it basically added them one in the middle. Gave us a middle class, but made the distance between them bigger. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going because we're gonna get to the third one and then we'll take some questions after that. So essentially, like when you think about the types of farming that really came about post-industrialization, The two to know are really intensive and extensive. And so we'll talk a little bit about those two here.
Awesome. Yeah. So intensive farming. This type of farming is focused on a high level of inputs. And so inputs are essentially anything we are, like the name suggests, inputting into the land. It's how much resources we are devoting to being able to cultivate goods. And so intensive farming is going to have a very small piece of land, but it's going to require a lot of inputs. And inputs include things like technology, human labor, seeds, and things like that, like water, that require us to create the outputs or goods. And so some common examples of these are subsistence agriculture, like we saw a couple slides back, where we're farming enough just to feed the household. And so this would be a type of intensive farming because if you're farming to feed just your family, you're typically going to have a small plot of land, not too big, but this land is going to require the work of everyone. So a lot of labor, a lot of inputs in order to grow enough food to feed the family. And so another type of farming we're going to see with intensive farming is mixed farming. And so mixed farming is actually, back then, it was like a whole whoa kind of idea where you can grow crops and you can raise animals at the same time. And so with this type of intensive farming, again, small piece of land, but it required a lot of labor because not only now did we have to put inputs to grow crops, but we had to grow enough crops to sell and to feed the animals. It had to be a 1-on-2 because the animals were eating the crops that we were growing. So a lot more inputs are needed in this type of farming. And then we're going to have market gardening. So I want you guys to think of market gardening like going to your local farmer's market and you see all the little cute booths with like the little trays and the carts of fruit. A lot of these were small scale production of flowers, fruits, vegetables. And so we're going to see market gardening, especially in urban areas, as we have a lot like small plots of land to deal with, but a lot of people just want to grow. They just want to garden in order to like make the urban area a lot more lively and a lot more green. And so this again is going to need lots of labor because like flowers, fruits, veggies require a lot of water and a lot of time spent on it to make sure everything's going great, but requires a small piece of land.
Oh, so intensive, just think of the little farmer. But
Yeah.
expensive, think of the little tractor, which is the emoji we use for AP Human Geo.
Yeah, it's quite the extensive class. So good job to everyone taking this. It's quite the achievement to say that you took AP Human. And okay, I see a question asking what's the difference between subsistence and extensive farming. So I don't want you to think of it as subsistence and extensive. I want you to think of it as subsistence and commercial versus intensive and extensive. So subsistence and extensive, push them aside. They're kind of two separate concepts. I don't really want you mixing the two together or even like relating the two. So I'm going to break this down into 2 steps. So subsistence versus commercial. So subsistence is only growing enough food to feed yourself and your family, whereas commercial is not focused about just feeding your household. It's focused about growing crops and livestock in order to sell. So that's the difference between those two. Now, intensive and extensive farming are characterized by the number of inputs and outputs we use to make farming. So one category was focused, the one we just discussed about, was focused more about selling or keeping for your household. This is about the amount of labor and machinery required. So intensive farming was going to be a small plot of land, but a lot of labor, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of water, a lot of seeds required, whereas extensive farming is going to be relatively low labor and inputs because when we have a larger plot of land, we need a lot more machinery. So we need less people because now we have machinery, but we do need machinery to keep up with the demands of the high plot sizes we have and the high amount of land we have now. And so an example of extensive farming would be nomadic herding. Nomadic herding is extensive because you're not confined to one place. You don't have a singular farm. you're following the animals wherever you go. So like the entire world is your farm for all you're concerned about. You're just following the animal, kind of living your best life doing so. And so it requires low levels of labor because you're not really growing much. You're just following the animals and you're just finding the food that you kind of find along the destiny. And then slash and burn / shifting cultivation. This is extensive because, like I mentioned a couple slides earlier, slash and burn is going to have a large plot of land. And this land is going to be covered by several of hundreds of trees. So think almost like acres of land. And so in order to get rid of these trees, we are going to burn through them. And so fire, not really hard to produce. It's not really, doesn't require a lot of labor, a lot of people to do it. And to set kind of the forest on fire doesn't require a lot of people to do it either, because all it takes is one spark. So there's going to be low levels of input, low levels of fire, low levels of people to start the fire in order to be able to complete this type of slash and burn farming. So it's going to be extensive. And then plantation agriculture. So when you guys think of plantation agriculture, I want you to think of cash crops. Cash crops include like tobacco, coffee, cotton. These are types of farms which focused on just one type of crop specifically. So we're going to see large plots of land known as plantations, all focusing on growing one type of land, not land, one type of crop. And so one of the consequences about growing only one type of crop is that you're going to actually deplete the soil of its resources, because these crops all over your farm need the same resources. They need the same amount of each mineral, each fiber. And so because of this, they're depleting the soil, and you're not giving the soil enough time to rejuvenate and reset. So this kind of type of agriculture is quite harmful in the long-term effect to the soil you're on, but it's a type of extensive farming. It's low levels of labor, and it produces quite the amount of goods. So that's why extensive farming can be popular sometimes. And then you have livestock ranching. So livestock ranching does not focus about growing crops. It focuses on raising cattle. So cattle, unlike crops, need a lot of space because they're going to want to roam around. They are animals. They need the space in order to grow and flourish. And so this is going to need a lot of land in order for like cows, chickens, and pigs to live in, as compared to like tomatoes or like bananas. And so because of this, we are going to need a lot of land, and we don't need as many people to take care of cattle as we would plants or crops. So because of this, it's going to be a type of extensive farming. And then I saw a question just a little back asking, is slash and burn, I believe the question was, is it bad for the soil? And yes, it is, because if you're going to keep on burning the plants that are kind of like attached to the soil, you're reducing the soil's fertility. This ash is not good for the soil, so it's actually going to harm it.
Perfect. Yeah, I know there was some confusion too around like which types. When you think about extensive farming, just think about the size. Like in extensive farming, a lot of times, like not all these examples, but a lot of times it is tied to commercial, and it's like you need a lot of land, you need a lot of like space, and so just think about like what is needed to do these things, right?
Yeah, mostly about inputs.
Exactly. What regions of the world do each of the extensive and intensive examples mainly occur? I don't think that either of these are specific to any regions.
Not anymore. Maybe like once upon a time, because like a really funny thing we see nowadays is that we start to see a lot of intensive farming in urban areas because people are trying to make cities, which are commonly thought of as like drab and just all buildings and skyscrapers. They're trying to green up the place. And so in cities, you have a low plot of land to work with, very few places that you can actually garden, but it requires a lot of input. So you're going to see intensive farming in a lot of new urban cities like Japan and even New York, when a lot of people thought, that like intensive farming was something only predominantly done in like less developed countries, but it's actually making a reemergence.
That's such a good example. All right, so I think we've got two or three more slides, and then we'll head into a break. But this slide is just essentially farming is costly. It's costly on a monetary level, on a human level, in the land. It takes a lot, especially when you think about like the difference between intensive and extensive here. You're spending money on different things, but they are both costly.
Because like extensive, whereas it might not need a lot of people, but it needs a lot of technology because it's much larger plots of land. And this technology does not come by cheap. So because of this, it's also going to be very expensive. And then whereas intensive is going to need a lot of like labor work. So it's going to have more of a cost in like the labor section.
Exactly. So this one was just kind of a quick note on the cost of them. All right, we are in our third agricultural revolution of 3 of 3. I mean, at least so far. Maybe there'll be a fourth one. But let's talk about the green revolution of the 1900s.
Awesome. So the Green Revolution, I don't want you to think of this as an event that has already occurred because we are currently living through this. The Green Revolution is still occurring as we're making more technological advancements. So before, in the second agricultural revolution, it's all about industrialization and the commercial of farming. It's all about technology, how can we make things more efficient and faster? Whereas the Green Revolution, rather than it just being all about technology, it's going to be a lot of science and genetics. How can we make what we already have better? How can we make it bigger? How can we make it grow faster? So it's all about trying to make a product grow more faster and be more appealing through the use of genetics and molecular science. So here we have advancements in plant biologies. We're trying to discover what makes an apple more larger, what makes it more crispier. How can we grow strawberries faster? We're trying to find the answers to these questions. So in the Green Revolution, we're going to see the emergence of something called GMOs, which stands for genetically modified organisms. I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you go to almost any grocery store near you, you're going to see a lot of products having a little label on it, and it's going to say either GMO or non-GMO. And so when an organism, such as a plant, is genetically modified, we are going to see that it is going to have a lot of desirable characteristics that it's not as common, or it's very rare in just normal non-GMOs. So for an example, an apple. A genetically modified apple might be designed to be more larger, more plumper, and more juicier. Whereas a normal apple, it can have like deficiencies. You can have a rotten apple. But what do GMOs do? They try to reduce the existence of having the rotten apple. They want all apples to be perfect. Why? Because this is going to entice humans to buy it more quicker. So it's all about more food. How can we produce more and better food while decreasing the cost of it?
Perfect. So I just put this in the chat to make it super easy. The first agricultural revolution is farming. Number 2 is industrial machines. Number 3 is science. I mean, there's definitely a lot of sciences involved in the first 2, but if you want to make it like as simple, overgeneralized as possible. The Green Revolution is definitely something to know. Sometimes you'll see like whole FRQ on this.
Yeah, this is a pretty good concept to kind of have in your works. If like you have to learn about one agricultural revolution over the other, I would say spend most of your time in the Green Revolution as it is very current to today's society.
Yeah, I would totally agree. The first 2 are just like context for how we even got here. Oops, went back. But there's like a lot of consequences of the Green Revolution. So just like we talked about consequences of the first 2, in this case, it's the same thing. And we're very much living in it. So we don't even quite know all of the extent to these things. But we do know, in this case, we have a few more positive ones on the left, and then obviously the more negative ones on the right.
Yeah. So some of kind of like the pros of the green revolution is going to be higher yields. And so one of the reasons the green revolution was even kickstarted was to help combat like world hunger across the country. They wanted to make food more easily like producible in like less developed countries. So we're going to see the increase in the higher yields of a lot of like carbohydrates such as wheat, corn, and rice because they give a lot of quick and fast energy. So a lot of scientists decided to focus on these goods. Also, if we're able to increase the efficiency at which we produce foods, it's going to lower the prices of it and make it more accessible for people to buy. However, almost nothing is without its costs. So with the climate, we're going to see a bunch of kind of deficiencies because of the use of fossil fuels that the green revolution is taking. It's going to require the use of a lot of fertilizers. And these fertilizers sometimes are produced with the help of fossil fuels. And the fertilizers can cause environmental damage because as they're kind of leaked into the waterways, into the like rivers and lakes, it is going to harm the local environment. And this can cause runoff and pollution in our society. And so another thing that people think about when they think of the Green Revolution is kind of corporate greed. This was built on a lot of private investment, people trying to spend their own time, their own money, their own resources into try to figuring out how to end this problem. And so it became really much like a huge business of agro-technology as companies started to kind of build upon this notion of the science and the genetics behind farms and crops. And so another consequence would be urbanization because now with genetically modified organisms, less and less farmers are needed because a lot of these plants are being kind of watched in a more science environment, in laboratories. So we're going to see a lot more farmers, unfortunately, coming to the urban area. And kind of this is going to cause overcrowding in these areas because we're seeing a lot more people migrating here. And this is also going to widen the gender gap as men are typically going to benefit more from the Green Revolution because a lot of them already have the access to education and the technology needed in order to capitalize from the Green Revolution rather than women per se. And before we move on, I kind of wanted to highlight that like this slide is called the consequences of the Green Revolution. When you see the word consequences, I don't want you guys just to think of like bad things. Consequences, all it simply means in AP Human are the effects. We can have positive consequences and we can have negative consequences. Unless a question specifically says, name a positive consequence or name a negative consequence, you can use either examples.
That's such a good call out because that they do use this word in FRQs and you can really get tripped up when you are only trying to think about the bad things. But a lot of times the good things are oftentimes always the same. It's like, more food, more availability of education, more healthcare. It's just like more stuff is usually the like positive side of things. All right. So we've got one more note on the Green Revolution, and then we will head into a few minutes of a break to let our brains just sizzle out. So the Green Revolution has not had the same effect everywhere. So I wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit about specifically the continent of Africa.
Yeah, and so I kind of find this whole concept ironic because one of the main reasons the Green Revolution was kickstarted is to help less developed countries, such as those in Sub-Saharan Africa, kind of solve their hunger and starvation problems by helping them mass produce certain crops. However, countries in like Sub-Saharan Africa often lack the infrastructure or the resources or certain inputs like water in order to be able to produce these genetically modified organisms or in order to use the fertilizers and things that the Green Revolution invented. So we saw farmers in Africa kind of falling back even further as developed and developing countries are given a bunch of these resources because they have like the policies and the infrastructure needed to take on the green revolution, whereas Africa kind of does. A lot of countries didn't have that implication. So because of this, farmers in Africa were like financially hurt because a lot of people were now buying from bigger corporations who can make these products faster than the local people in sub-Saharan Africa could. So this kind of really like widened the wealth gap in a lot of like less developed countries.
You know, if we're lucky, maybe this will be the FRQ question, and then you'll all be like, "Hey, damn, they spent some time on that, and I was telling them to go faster, but I'm so glad they explained it." All right, let's take a much deserved, much needed break. I'll put the timer on. I think this is a 5-minute timer. Oh, there was some music behind that. All right, we will also take a break, and we'll be right back. Use this time to, you know, stretch, go get some water, do a little dance in your seat. Goodbye. All right. I'm over here just like trying to eat my dinner and my break. All right. Get back into it. We're going to keep it moving.
Yeah.
This next half is really now all about, okay, so in this first half, we sort of got the like, you have agriculture, here's how it's changed over time. In the second half, it's like, how do we as societies across the world really use agriculture to then like build businesses, and like what does that look like within, around the world differently, just a lot of it. So we're going to talk about the different models. We'll talk about the different regions. Cool. I'm just reading this question.
Awesome.
All right. Why don't we go ahead and explain regions?
Yeah. Okay, Amanda, the graph is a little hard for me to see. Do you think you can quickly like explain the color types really quick?
Yeah. I think it's a little hard for me to see too. Okay, so can you see my let me turn the laser pointer on. Can you see my laser?
I can't.
Okay, so basically what you have, essentially the thing to know here, there was a question, an FRQ question a couple years ago about coffee. And what really tripped students up is they were just like, I don't know where coffee is. But one thing to really know, and Kushi did mention this earlier, is like agriculture is very connected to the climate, right? So like where people are in the world matters a lot in terms of what kinds of agriculture they're going to be able to produce. So in this case, this actually is talking about it's organized by developed and developing countries, and this is like the different types of agriculture that you see. And so a lot of the green in here, you see intensive, subsistence, wet rice, shifting cultivation. In the red and the browns up here, you have more mixed dairy, grain, livestock. The purple in here is like commercial gardening, and the purple on the East Coast. So, I don't know that you, I don't know that you know. Like, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. You say whatever you want to about this.
No, you're good. You just pointed out that the East Coast has a bit of intensive farming. And like we mentioned earlier, as we can see, like the emergence of intensive farming in major cities, such as like New York, which are going to be located on the East Coast of America. So that's one of the reasons we're going to see in contemporary agriculture as kind of the old methods, such as intensive farming, are going to make its way back into urbanized areas.
Perfect. Okay, so just talking a little bit, we'll kind of get into those specific types of things in a second, but also wanted to just kind of point out thought this was kind of fun. This is the most lucrative food crop in each state. So curious in the chat, if you can see this map, I know it's a little bit small, but which is the most lucrative food crop in your state? I thought this was kind of interesting because it's like,
yeah, go ahead.
We don't always think about, I don't know, the agricultural, like the crops that exist like in every state. We just think about like other industries, but the fact that like this is such a big part of industries across the country. I especially liked lettuce in Arizona. I don't know, it kind of surprised me.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know lettuce was like the most lucrative food crop in Arizona. That's not exactly the first thing that comes to mind when I think of Arizona.
I know. Grapes, $5.2 billion industry in California. Well, most of the other ones are millions, except for wheat, which are billions in here. Just wild.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Totally. All right. So talking a little bit more about these agricultural regions. So these are the sort of different types, and we've talked about a lot of these already, but just wanted to like put this in here again to just kind of call out one more time. It does have some of the areas in here. We can go back, look at the map as well. Anything that you want to call out on this one that you haven't yet already?
Nothing major. This is a perfect opportunity if you guys want to take like really quick and easy notes, rather than using the study guide. It does a nice, neat job of like breaking down the different types of the agricultural regions. So again, we see pastoral nomadism, which is the same thing as like nomadic farming. They just added the little fancy word in front of it, makes it more sophisticated. And then, like I said before earlier, when you think of plantation agriculture, I want you guys to think of cash crops. The biggest thing is that they're going to emphasize on focusing on one specific type of crop, which is going to bring in all the cash. And it's typically going to be like tobacco, coffee, or cotton. And then grain farming, kind of indicated in the name. But one of the biggest things to know about this type of farming is that it requires a dry climate. So in order to grain farm, we need a drier environment. So this is going to very much influence where grain farming is produced. And then again, we're going to see like shifting cultivation and the slash and burn method, which again is kind of in the name. That's what I love about these types of agriculture. Many of them kind of indicate what it is. And oh, I see a perfect question right now. What is the difference between shifting cultivation and slash and burn? So slash and burn is actually going to be a type of shifting cultivation agriculture. And if I'm not mistaken, shifting cultivation is going to be a type of farming where farmers are going to move like around fields throughout the seasons. They're going to be like, oh, I want to plant cotton today or like this season. So I'm going to go to this field because the soil's much nicer. And then after I'm done with the cotton season, because the weather is now much better for growing pineapples, I'm going to move to another area. So shifting cultivation is all about farmers moving certain fields. And then the slash and burn method is while farmers move across these certain fields, they are using like fire to burn the native wildlife in order to grow what they want to grow that season. So that's going to be the biggest thing, is that slash and burn is a type of shifting cultivation. And then we're going to see mixed crop / livestock farming. Mixed crop means that both livestock and crops are being grown at the same time, hence the mixed part. And the biggest takeaway with this type of farming is that we're going to need a lot more crops now, because not only do we have to produce enough crops to sell, but we got to feed our animals as well. And then we're going to see commercial gardening, which is kind of like the fun, urbanized gardening. It's when we're going to see like the cute little farmers markets. It's going to be mostly fruits and vegetables, small plots of land, mostly in California and Southeast USA.
I love that. Commercial gardening is so cute. 3 more types of agricultural regions.
Yeah, okay. So we have dairy farming. And one of the biggest things with dairy farming is going to be that we can now mass produce dairy. Way back when, like even in the second agricultural unit, we couldn't mass produce dairy as much because we had no means of preserving the milk and keeping it refrigerated as we do today. So like even if we decided to mass produce milk, all of it is just going to go bad within like days. And so, but now that we're able to refrigerate milk, we can have large corporate farms that allow us to mass produce dairy. And so this is very relevant form of contemporary type farming. And then we're also going to see livestock ranching, which is just all about cattle. It's going to be all about growing and raising cattle. And so you're going to need lots of land to do this one. And then Mediterranean is right where it is. It's going to be in the Mediterranean area of the world. And this is going to be characterized by its like very hot and dry summers. And so typically farmers who practice Mediterranean farming, that is not their only thing they do the entire year, because it requires a very specific type of weather. So here we're going to see transhumans. Transhumans. It's a fun word, but we're going to see transhumans as it's going to be a very type of seasonal workers. So as we learned in Unit 2, I believe, so Cram Session 1, one of the many reasons people migrate is going to be for jobs, such as agriculture. So during the times where the Mediterranean has these hot, dry summers, we're going to see farmers coming to the Mediterranean to practice transhumans and do seasonal herding to higher elevations, because the weather is much more enjoyable in a higher elevated area, because it's going to be a lot cooler in the hot, dry summers. and then they'll go back down to lower elevation when it's a lot colder to get away from the cold air.
Perfect. Two quick notes. Mediterranean is also in California. It's just like in this case, it describes the climate, and that the climate of the Mediterranean, like literally in the Mediterranean, is very similar to that in California. The other thing, I just read this about dairy farming. This is just kind of a fun fact. Did you know that we've basically been like overproducing cheese for like decades, and there are just straight up like warehouses full of cheese that the government basically like pays to keep just hanging on to. It's kind of wild. Like even like you remember like the entire like got milk ads and those campaigns? A lot
Yeah,
of those were basically because we just were overproducing milk.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I thought it was like, oh, that is so cool. I didn't know that's what it was for.
Isn't that wild? It's just like they're just I don't know why we're hoarding cheese. I have no idea. I literally just saw this on TikTok and I was like, damn, like what are we doing? Like but it's just another example of just like, we've got the refrigeration for it. We can. And so I think we just are like, I guess we'll just hang on to it. All right. So we're shifting into talk about the agribusiness side of things, and we'll get into the models and whatnot and the different business side of agriculture. But first, just kind of wanted to do a quick little like comparison of what it's like to be more like a vegetable farmer that's like a homeowner, like the more subsistence side versus the agribusiness side, the more commercial side, and what literally the two different sides of this will look like.
Yeah. So like homeowner um farming, which is actually making a reemergence in contemporary farming. So homeowner is kind of like subsistence, where it's going to be very much like just growing vegetables in your backyard or your garden, just for a lot of times in modern day societies, especially in America, we're gonna see it as kind of like a hobby. It's just for fun, you know. We like to do this as like a side hustle or just to have like the fresh herbs that we need in order to use in our cooking. So that's really going to be homeowner, is going to be us kind of making, well, not making, but growing crops again. Especially we see a reemergence in homeowner farming because now a lot of people kind of want to stray away from genetically modified organisms such as plants. They're going to want the organic, and organic means non-genetically modified. They're going to want these kind of goods. So, because of this, homeowner farming is definitely making a reemergence in many contemporary societies today. Whereas agribusiness, many of them are still going to be using genetically modified organisms, unless they specialize in non-GMOs. And so, in order to process these kind of foods, they're going to can it, add preservatives to it, or freeze it, and they're going to sell it to these kind of retail stores or stores that are very predominant in certain parts of their cities in order to mass distribute and mass sell this. And then in order to finance their operations, they're going to need a lot more money than your normal homeowner. And so they're going to take out loans in order to be able to finance this. And so agribusiness is very much going to use genetically modified organisms. And so in order to do this, it's going to have a lot of extensive research on the molecular genetics of like seeds, benefits of pesticides, and how to best apply them.
Perfect. All right, so that'll kind of set us up for really getting into the agribusiness commodity system. This may have been called something else in different, there's different names of it, but it's essentially this like the food chain, right? In this case, it's more of like a system, more of a cycle, because there's this like recyclable mechanism within it. It's not just like output and then gone.
Yeah.
But it is important to sort of know this is the system of how things go.
Mm-hmm.
As we talk about it, should we use like a certain food?
Yeah, I always love using strawberry jam in order to
Ooh,
explain this. I use strawberry jam a lot. It's really fun, really versatile. So, strawberry jam first starts off with strawberries. And so, strawberries are produced in farms. You have to harvest, cultivate and harvest the strawberries. And so, you take these strawberries, and these strawberries are then distributed. to food processing sites. So you have a bunch of strawberries going from your farm in order to this huge factory. And in this factory is when we're going to see it being processed. We're going to take away what we consider those bad strawberries and only have the good strawberries in order to make the best strawberry jam. And here we're going to add preservatives because we're only in like the third part of the commodity chain. These strawberries have to last the rest of the journey up until it gets to our homes and our plates. So we're going to add a bunch of like preservatives in there to make sure everything's all good and it can survive the rest of the journey through the commodity chain. So then we're going to get to the marketing and market development factory. And here we're going to can these goods. We're going to make them appealing. So based on what the brand is, we're going to put them in containers and like embezzle them with brand logos to say, hey, this is our product, woohoo. And then from there, they're going to go to your local retail store or groceries where they are being sold for consumption and for us to, use strawberry jams on almost everything. I mean, I don't know. I use it on a lot of things. I love it on like bread or like with the cheese plate. I don't know your guys' favorites, but I really do love strawberry jam. And then the containers in which the strawberry jam are in, most of them are glass containers, as we commonly see. They are going to be many times recycled. You can use glass for a lot more different purposes. And so it's going to go through the entire commodity chain again. It's a little cycle.
Love it. So yeah, you definitely should know this commodity system, and you can just think about the strawberry example or any type of food that you like. Just think about all the different stops it has to make along the way before it gets to you, and then what happens to that after.
Yeah. So basically, commodity chain is going from the raw product to our plates. That's Perfect. The biggest thing.
Exactly. All right, let's talk about von Thunen, which I know has come up a little bit already in the chat. This is also like, one of the major models to know in human geo. And so you really need to make sure you understand this one.
Yeah. My favorite thing about this model is this is like kind of one of the only models in AP Human where you almost really don't have to memorize because the whole concept of this model just makes sense. Everything about it, the whole reasoning behind it makes sense. So what this model shows is how land in a city is going to be allocated for certain agricultural units. So we first start off with the urban center. That's going to be the dark blue dot in the middle of this entire model. And so this is where all the goods are going to be sold. It is the market. It's where people come to get their goods, to get their strawberry jams, and kind of bounce out of there. And then right around the urban center, we're going to have dairy farming and market gardening. Why? Because these two goods expire the fastest. Dairy and like fresh fruit and vegetables are going to expire very quick because this model is without the assumption of refrigerators. Preservatives do not exist in this when this model was created. So basically, goods that expire the most fastest are going to be near the dark blue dot. And so the next ring is forestry. And I know a lot of people ask, why is forestry going to be so close to the urban center? And that's because we have to think of transportation. In this land model, we did not have transportation. When this model was created, transportation like cars, your trucks, trailers, not a thing. So in order to be able to transport these heavy goods, because lumber is very heavy, it had to be close to the market because otherwise that was not going to happen. No ox is going to work that hard to pull it all the way to the urban center. And then next, we're going to see grains and field crops. This is going to be further away from the marketplace because they're much easier, one, to transport to the market garden because they're a lot more lightweight, and two, they need a lot more space. They cannot be confined to the tiny space that like dairy farming has. So they need to be further away from the urban market. And then finally, we have ranching and livestock. So there's going to be two reasons why this is the furthest away. One, it requires a lot of space. You cannot expect animals like cattle to be confined to a certain like little tiny dot. No, it needs the wilderness. It needs the space. Two, we're not concerned about transportation. These animals can walk themselves to the urban market. We do not have to worry about like carrying them on our backs like we do like forestry because they can walk themselves. So we are good on that case. So that's why it's going to be the furthest away from the urban center.
Perfect. All right, grab your charger and I will tie in some things here. So we will talk about the bid rent theory in unit 6. The last thing to kind of note on here is just generally just think about this model as explaining where these different types of agriculture exist. Right? It's just trying to show like this is it's very simplified, right? It's not all of like the cities and places that look like this. And remember, as she said, that this is not taking refrigeration into effect. All right, so I'm gonna keep moving just to kind of help us with the timing. Oh, welcome back to Fully Charged.
We're all good.
So there's some things that you need to consider when you're applying von Thunen because it's not always going to work perfectly, right? It's like this is a very simple, like look at these nice concentric circles, so perfect, right? If you're building a town on like SimCity, I don't even know if people play that anymore, but like if you're building on like there, like sure, this is fine. You can start from scratch, but that's not what the world is like. And so there's lots of reasons why this sort of has to be adapted.
Yeah, when von Thunen created this model, he made many assumptions. He was like, yeah, this is the perfect model. I realized, so in order for people to study this model, you're going to have to assume many things. One of them is that this is going to be a flat area. This city is based off of an area with practically no geographical constraints. There's not going to be rivers, mountains, or barriers that affects how you farm or how you transport goods. So it's all going to be flat, is what he assumed, which we know from many places is far from the case. You're going to always have that little thing that's going to get in your way, whether it comes to cultivation or whether it comes to transportation. And so with transportation, he did not make this in a time where, we had things to get our goods like forestries and lumber from a wilderness area into the urban market. So now, with contemporary societies, we have major improvements in air travel, which essentially changes everything. Which saying like, you don't need to grow forestry, you don't need lumber everywhere. If one place can focus on lumber, great. That's one little circle, the one little ring you're eliminating from your spectrum. So that helps a lot too. And then in the real world, we don't have just one market. Like, I would be so sad if all I had was like just one store in my city. No, I love Target. I need my Target. I could not survive without just one grocery store. So with multiple markets, you have multiple places where people can go to buy goods. And so because of this, more farmers can set up their farms around these stores. So, we're not really constrained by the market sense anymore. And then with energy technology, we have refrigeration. We're not so concerned anymore about dairy farming being closer to cities or with like an urban market, such as like ones growing like fresh fruit and vegetables being closer to a city because we have refrigeration. A lot of great things happened.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you're taking notes, just really think of these things as the limitations of this model. Right, like this model it was not designed, and this is true for all the models. Models are like one snapshot of one person's view of the world, right? At that exact moment in time. But think about, we just talked about how much things have changed over time. And so that's why all these models, you can really like debate the efficacy of them. Like, we talked about Malthus, we talking about von Thunen now, we'll talk about a whole bunch more later too, but it's just like, at that moment for that one mostly white dude, sure, like that may be the world, but is this applicable to everywhere always? No, there are limitations to it. And so keep that in mind as you're writing out your notes and thinking about if it comes up in an FRQ with like something like that. All right, so we have 2 more slides for this unit, and then we're going to do this Unit 6 quiz so we can do some dancing together. The first one is just a couple of notes on the agricultural innovations that have existed. So we did talk about GMOs already, but we'll talk about the other 2 here.
Yeah. So GMOs, genetically modified organisms, we're trying to find the best ways to create the best crops that we want. And so in opposition to this, a lot of people were concerned about like the health and consumer risks of GMOs, such as how much fertilizer and preservatives are being added into these things. So then we see the emergence of organic foods. So organic foods, think like Whole Foods. They're going to emphasize on farming without these excessive pesticides or preservatives. They want original food. They want organic. They don't want all this like things intertwined within it. And so organic food is going to be more expensive than GMOs because GMOs can be produced much more fastly, much more quickly than organic food can be. So organic food is going to be a little bit more expensive. And then we're going to have aquaculture. So aquaculture, really fun. It's going to be about raising and harvesting seafood. So in order to do this, you are almost like essentially setting up in a lot of places. Like I want you to like envision a net in the middle, not a net, like a cage in the middle of the ocean where these fish are just like living in. And so we call this sometimes the blue revolution because we found a way to raise food that don't even live on our land. It lives in the sea. So this was kind of like a wild idea for a long time, but now we have the blue revolution. And so some concerns with these are that it can be harmful to natural habitats because like almost imagine like a cage just being dropped in the middle of the ocean. It's going to definitely disturb the natural wildlife there. They're going to be like, what is this? Doesn't quite make sense. So it can cause a lot of environmental harm.
Perfect. All right. And the very last point on agriculture is just like a huge downer. It's like we talked so much about, agriculture and food and how much this has opened up for people with like, really improving the types of food that we can get to people across the world. But it also just like there's a lot of effects on the environment that we've talked about throughout this unit. And so we just wanted to also just take a moment to kind of mention these as well, as especially some of those like new technologies have affected the environment, but also just over time, the way that we have so many different, the way that our population has grown and we're like now like creating foods in places that they don't naturally exist. And so like, what does this do to the earth? So talk a little bit about some of these effects.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things with the Green Revolution is that we need chemicals and fossil fuels in order to help cultivate this mass production of these goods through these scientific means, because pesticides, fertilizers, they all require chemicals, and many of them are created with fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are not only non-renewable resources, but they're extremely detrimental to the ozone layer and to climate when used in the mass way it is used in the Green Revolution. And so this can be really harmful to like the air and the climate. And so we're also going to see the depletion of water supplies. And so one of the biggest reasons that the Green Revolution didn't really kick off in Africa was that it required so much water. In order to grow these genetically modified organisms, it requires a lot of water. That is one of the biggest inputs it requires. And so in countries that are less developed, they're going to much rather emphasize that water to actually drink. They would much rather drink that water and use it to bathe than they would to grow plants, because it's a lot of water. And a lot of these people may view it as unnecessary because, they could use it for much more beneficial purposes. And so even for countries that use genetically modified organisms, it is going to cause a depletion of their water supplies because it's going to need so much. And so with genetically modified organisms, we're also going to see a loss of biodiversity because we're essentially building the perfect crop. We are building the perfect strawberry, the perfect apple. We are building what we want. And so in order to do this, we're almost kind of like eliminating natural selection. It's humans that are taking over this process and creating what we think is the best version of everything. And so because of that, there's going to be no more biodiversity because everything is the same based on what we think is the best product. And so this is going to cause soil degradation and erosion because you need land in order to farm. And if you're farming to the extent at which we are today, it's going to require a lot of land and it's going to require deforestation in order to plow land to use. And so when we deforest a certain area, we are uprooting all the soil, and that soil is now exposed to the air. And so with that, erosion can quickly happen and it can damage our local environments. And then additionally, we are now using livestock and cultivating livestock a lot more than we were before the Green Revolution. And so all this animal waste that we it's just a product of livestock. It is going to have a lot of harmful effects on the ozone layer and the climate with methane gas and CO2. It's just going to cause an overall problem to the weather.
Woo. All right. The crowd favorite. Well, we'll come back and do this break after, but we are going to do a Unit 5 quiz. Woo! All right, I'm going to end sharing my screen and then share it again.
Oh, you guys did it. This is a pretty intense unit, but definitely one of my favorites because it's so relevant to society. It's essentially in everything we do. So I thought it was definitely really cool to like learn about how we're doing this.
For sure. It can definitely be really hard. It's like just like a lot to know. Oops. Start quiz. Can you hear the music?
I can hear it.
All right, my friends. Let's play.
Yeah. When I hear this music, I want to go to the beach. This is like going to be my new beach song.
I told you, I literally put it. We chose this song because like 2 reasons. It kind of is like a little nod to my Brazilian heritage of the samba music, but it's also a little nod to the little pepper too. All right, the link is in the green buttons, and I'm going to start quiz, and you can keep joining us as we go. Turn the music down a little bit. You can read the question. Before agriculture, how did people obtain food? It's easy.
You guys got this.
This one's just to make you feel really good. If only the AP test was like this.
Hey, maybe it is. For all we know.
All right, reveal, please. 100% of like 200 of you got that right. I mean, it was easy, but still, good job.
Woohoo! Hunting and gathering.
Good work. All right, what exchange helped the diffusion of different crops around the world? These are easy. We're gonna upgrade our questions this summer on Findable and add new questions for every subject. If you're taking another AP next year.
But these questions, you would know if you pay attention. So they're really good to exactly see the extension to which you obtained information.
That is true.
You know, it can be good.
That is definitely true. Look at these little emojis coming up everywhere. All right, reveal. 97%. Look at you guys paying attention. I know there was a lot more questions of just like, what do I need to know about the Columbian Exchange? You just need to know that stuff was exchanged. Like, this is not AP world, but just really know that like Africa, Europe, and Africa, Europe, and the Americas know that triangle. And you can kind of, if you know like a few crops, that would be dope. But just know that like crops, disease, people, ideas, traded.
Yeah, because the Columbian diffusion is not only like relevant to Unit 5, it's also relevant to the whole concept of diffusion. Because this is when we really, for the first time, see diffusion happening, diffusion of ideas, customs, culture, religion. So it's going to be just this huge thing. It's going to be what kickstarted diffusion.
Perfect. All right. In which group of countries are GMOs used the most widely in agriculture?
Ooh.
This one's not going to be 100%.
I believe in you guys.
100% on this. I'm going to be like, I'm going to literally call College Board. Are they on my speed dial? Just kidding. I don't talk to College Board. They don't like me. All right. Real answer. Wow. Good work.
Oh, nice job, you guys. Yeah. So the biggest thing I want you to guys think of when you hear GMOs are going to be your most developed countries. So whenever you see this, you can kind of eliminate choice D because India is more of a BRICS country. It is developing. So there's going to be less likely of a chance that, it's going to have a lot of genetically modified organisms. And then Kenya is going to be a developing country as well. It's getting there, but not quite to the extent that America, Brazil, and Argentina are. And then France, Germany, and Netherlands, they are the largest producers of agriculture in the country. So even though they do have the capacity to use genetically modified organisms, United States, Brazil, and Argentina are just going to do it more.
Love it. All right. The Green Revolution refers to. Talked about it a bunch of times. I guess we should have put one in here about the Blue Revolution. I like all the revolutions that just get different colors.
Oh, so fun. I need like a red revolution just for like the revolution of strawberry jam. I want that to be produced more faster.
It's when all the strawberries rose up and took over.
Just like figure out how to mass produce strawberries even more quickly.
This is awesome. I'm really, really excited that y'all know the Green Revolution. So
Woo-hoo.
Advances in technology, just kind of look for that. That was a really good call out in there. All right, I'm gonna keep it moving. The Green Revolution was most beneficial towards which region? We're going to send this quiz out to all your teachers and see if they can, next year, they'll play the quiz in class, And then you'll be like, in class, like.
That should good. Yeah. I would definitely do it just for the music.
All right. Let's see. All right. We got this one.
Okay. So this one was, I can see a little bit more turn than the other questions. So I'm going to go ahead and explain it a little. If you guys remember from one of the previous slides, the biggest things that the Green Revolution first started producing is going to be a lot of grains, a lot of rice. Rice was one of the first crops to be kind of used with the idea of the Green Revolution. And so rice is going to be predominantly grown in Southeast Asia. And so Southeast Asia is going to have the biggest, most beneficial, one of the most beneficial causes of or effects the Green Revolution.
Perfect. All right, a few more. According to the Thünen Model, which would be closest to the markets? I feel like I'm ready for my AP Human Geography test. I haven't like studied this stuff in so long. If I had seen this a couple weeks ago, I'd have been like, I don't know.
So, yeah. But AP Human is so relevant that
It totally
the
is.
knowledge that you learn for this class, you can apply it to almost every single new class you take.
Totally. Oh, right. Good job.
Nice job, you guys.
This is really good. And this means you're getting the model.
Yeah. Von Thunen made a lot of assumptions.
The invention of electricity made which zone in the von Thünen model no longer necessary? We didn't talk about them in terms of zone number.
Yeah. So I guess I think zone 1 is going to be closer to the urban market. So just kind of use that to answer this question.
Yeah, sometimes they are labeled with numbers.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to reveal this one. I know we still got some people answering. Woo, we are spread out. Okay, so why does zone 1 not, why does electricity affect zone 1?
Yeah, so zone 1 is going to be dairy farming and market gardening. And so the reason why they were the closest to the urban market is because they expired the most quickly. We didn't have refrigeration when the von Thunen model was really considered. And so because of that, we needed to get those goods sold as quickly as possible. And so now that we can refrigerate goods, milk is not going to expire as quickly anymore. So milk and fresh fruits and vegetables can be produced much further away from the urban market.
Perfect. All right, 2 left. According to the von Thunen model, which of the following costs is a commercial farmer concerned with?
Now, for this one, I want you guys to think which one of the zones were commercial farming, as maybe opposed to more subsistence.
Gotta make the question harder. All right. Reveal. Boom.
Look at
This
you
one.
guys.
This is good. So some people did say transportation costs. So why is that not the only one?
Transportation costs, it's not the only one because labor costs were a huge thing because those with commercial farming are oftentimes going to have a lot of land. They're going to have, a lot of land because they're mass producing goods in order to sell. So they're very concerned with the cost of labor per se, because, they're also going to be investing in all these modern day technologies as well. And they're going to need a lot of land. So they're really concerned with land costs as well, because in order to commercial farm, you're going to need a lot of land to do that.
Perfect. All right, this is the last one. So we're going to let the music play a little bit longer. So we've got, you can hear the, the lyrics, whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Hit those emojis. We'll get them flying for this last one for unit 5. What is the main cause of food insecurity in the modern world? Maybe we should have 5 little samba dance classes.
That would be fun. Just the night before the AP exam in order to get all those nerves out. Like a little dance party. You guys got this.
Smash those emojis. I wish on here I could have a game where I'm trying to hit them. Like a fruit ninja.
Oh, I loved that game as a kid. I don't know why. I would be absolutely obsessed.
Let me hear it, chat. We could get the lyrics for this. all together now. Like a little louder on the left. I'm not a Cram host. My new title is orchestra. What do they call it? I'm a conductor. There we go. All right, I'm gonna reveal the answer. Oh wow, this one kind of tripped some people up. So the correct answer is B, unequal distribution.
Yeah, so you guys, we do not have a food production problem. No, the Green Revolution practically almost removed this entire problem. We are now producing a lot of food. And so, especially in the US, think about it. We produce a lot of food, and so much of that is wasted. It goes into garbage, landfill. If this food was also grown in Africa and it was equally distributed in the world, we could help end world hunger if we focused on distribution. We're not feeding, but we're growing almost enough food to feed almost everyone in this world. So it's definitely not a production problem. We have the means to produce food, it's just distributing. And I saw a couple questions asking what a food desert was. And so I wanted to take a second really quick to explain that. So a food desert is very much so a problem we've seen with urbanization. And as we went further along the agricultural revolutions, so food desert is a place where it's very hard to access fresh food. There's not, think of an urban area, think of a city. It is a lot harder to gain access to fresh fruits if there are no supermarkets, because a lot of times you're going to have the farmers markets in more suburban areas than you would urban areas, because there's not enough place to have a farmers market. And so a food desert is when there are no fresh food available in an area. And this is actually commonly seen for the most part in more developed countries and the more impoverished areas of these countries, as they will have fast food. So fast food over fresh food, because people can afford and access fast food more so than they can fresh food. And so this causes food deserts, which there are no fresh food for people to have. And so that can cause a lot of health problems.
Perfect. All right, ending quiz so you can see your results. All right, that is it for me. Share this different screen. That is it for Unit 5. So we're going to do a quick break to give you guys some time to, stretch. And then Emily and Stephen will be ready to go for Unit 6.
Woohoo!
Thanks,
Good
y'all.
job, you guys.
Bye.
Units.
Emily, what's going on? We ready for this or what?
Oh yeah, the best unit in all of AP Human Geo. Are you kidding?
I'm stoked. Let's do it. All right. Let me get my audio all situated here. Chat, how we doing? How are we doing? AirPods. Let's see. Wait, here we go. All right. Emily, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Chat, can you hear me okay? Awesome. All right, let me get my slides shared and we'll get rocking and rolling. So we are heading to Unit 6 of Human Geo. Good. Where are we at? Share. Boom. All right.
All right, this is going to be Unit 6. This is Cities and Urban Land Use Patterns and Processes. This unit's going to have a lot of the city models that we all know and love, and we'll be sure to hit all of them in depth. All right, first, to start to get a good understanding of all of these different urban models, we need to get a good grasp on site and situation. These can really both impact the development and characteristics of a city. Site is going to be the physical characteristics of a place. So that's going to be like your climate, your natural resources, and all of that kind of stuff is going to influence that. So for example, I live in Minnesota, and if you don't like the cold winters, you're not going to last long. I hate to break it to you. And this can be described through absolute location as well. So it's like, what's the climate? What are the different characteristics at a certain exact location? And then on the other hand, situation is going to be how the sites connect relatively. So another example for me is I can say like, oh, I live near the Mississippi River, and that's the way that goods are transported and all that kind of stuff. So thinking about situation connecting site, and this will also connect through relative location. It's really relative location and situation is really helpful when it comes to thinking about access to trade and even access to other cities as well. And I know there's a lot of words on these slides. You definitely do not have to write everything down. It can be helpful just to get a few keywords down or just a nice refresher.
Yeah, so my hot tip for taking notes is you're going to see some bolded words. Those are typically the most important ones, right? Those are the ones that are going to be like our keywords, our vocab words, right? Those are the ones that are going to be most important. And so when you're taking notes, the goal is to not write everything because that's not going to do you any good. But if I'm looking at the slide and I see site and situation, I'm definitely going to write down site and situation because they're big and bold. But I'm also going to write down like physical characteristics for site, absolute location, right? That tells me what it is, but I don't have to write everything. So just remember, guys, when we're taking notes, it's a lot about doing what works for us, but also maximizing our time. Let's rock. Next slide.
All right, so some of the important differences to note for urban versus rural settlements is rural are going to be your typical smaller agricultural settlements. People are going to be more spread out horizontally across the land rather than vertically. That's going to be seen more in urban. Usually since there's less people in these rural communities, there's going to be less diversity culturally and less economic diversity as well. The economy in these communities are typically going to be more based on agriculture or other natural resource type based economies. In contrast, urban settlements are going to be found in your bigger cities with a much greater population size. There's going to be a lot of people and it's going to make it feel like there's little space, even if it is bigger than some of the rural communities, just because everything can feel a little bit more cramped. That's just going to add to that feel of having a lot of people. And there's going to be a lot of cultural exchange when you have all these different perspectives from all different people that are living in these urban areas. And then this is going to lead to a lot of transfer of ideas and really spread some of that globalization. They're able to have a lot of a more diverse economy due to the access to resources. And they're also going to have a diverse market. So they're going to be able to provide goods for different people that might not be there in those rural communities.
Yeah, totally. I think that understanding the difference between rural and urban is really important when we're thinking about space and location, just because we use those words often. So Emily, what would be an example of like a rural location?
So a rural location, obviously it's going to vary from like state to state. I know for sure like it can be easier to think of like an urban kind of settlement is going to be your bigger cities like Minneapolis, all those kinds of examples. Again, I'm from Minnesota, so I probably don't have the best like bigger city examples, but these are going to be like a lot of like farms and like outside of your cities and hometowns.
Yeah, think like farmland, big open expanses. Whereas, yeah, totally urban settlements, big cities, right? Minneapolis. We can also think of like Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, big sprawling places. Absolutely. And another thing to remember too is that urban and rural doesn't just have to describe a small area; it can describe a really large area too. You'll have whole regions of the United States that would be described as more urban, right? Like I live in New England, I live in New Hampshire, and we're really close to Boston. And in fact, there are a lot of areas that we wouldn't consider rural, even though, they might be an hour from Boston, but they're still really connected to Boston, right? Whereas I'm originally from South Carolina, you drive through the back roads of South Carolina, you're in the middle of nowhere. You're in a very rural setting. All right, let's go past rural and urban. Let's move on.
All right. Now I know one of the big confusing things is the difference between megacities and metacities. And the most important thing between the two is just the sheer number of people that are in the city, the population of the city. So you're going to want to remember that megacities have 10 million and metacities have 20 million. And one way that helped me to remember this is think of the T in metacity and then the T in 20. So again, that's just mega 10, meta 20. And then these larger cities, because these are both pretty large city sizes when you have 10 million or 20 million people living in them, they're usually able to have a lot of more influence on the global scale. And the meta cities are going to be considered world cities or global cities that are able to interact at a global level.
What do we think that means, interacting at a global level? Like, what does that really look like? Because I think this is a really interesting idea.
I would say definitely involvement in supranational organizations, which again are like the UN, and being able to create trade alliances and all of that kind of stuff. You can really create political entities like NATO and all of those kinds of organizations.
Yeah, so really connected with the global community. I like to think about, like, if you live in the United States, think about a city that you might know in Europe, right? If you know about a European city like Paris, for example, that's probably a global city because you are aware of it as an American. Inversely, a lot of non-Americans are probably very familiar with New York City. So it's a global city, right? It's very connected outside of the United States.
All right. And now there's different ways to sort cities by their size and importance. Because obviously the smaller the city, the less influence they'll have, and the larger city, the bigger influence they'll have. Hamlets are going to be your smallest settlements, and villages are only going to be just a little bit larger. These two would definitely be examples of rural settlements, as we've talked about previously. Towns and cities are going to have a larger influence, and they're going to have a lot of more population. As you can see, cities usually have a population of at least 100,000, and there's going to be a lot more of that urbanization.
Totally. And what I would say with like these types of like terms, knowing the like very, very specifics of like, oh, like this amount of people are in a village versus a town or a village versus a hamlet. Don't get too caught up on that. Knowing the basic ideas of the difference between a village, a hamlet, a town, knowing that a city is bigger than a village, you're going to be in good shape.
Okay, so two things that often get confused are rank size rule and primate city rule when you're describing the size of cities in relation to each other in one country. That's a big thing to remember with these two rules is you're describing cities in one country. So rank size rule is typically going to be found in MDCs where it allows multiple large cities within a country. As you can see here, in a country like the USA, for example, follows rank size rule, you're going to see the population of the cities having only half, and then it's going to be where you're still able to have cities with a population like that get closer together as it gets smaller. And so the population is going to be able to have many different large cities and much more access to different resources as well. And then in contrast to this, we have the primate city rule. These are going to deal with this one city being significantly more populated than any other city in a country. This is going to show an exponential relationship in population across the cities in a country. This is usually seen in less developed countries, and it can lead to a lot of overcrowding in the big city for sure. It also can occur in MDCs, but usually only if the country is small, like Paris and London. Those are both cities in more developed countries, but they are still primate cities just because the other cities aren't as large.
So that's a really interesting point, and I wanna kind of think about this idea of like the exception to the rule, right? How you talked about how Paris could be a good example of a primate city, even though France itself is not an LDC. And also, you know, if you guys ever like we use the word like MDC and LDC, you guys need us to like say those out like, you know, in full, right? So MDC is more developed country, LDC is less developed country. Just make sure you let us know in chat. Ring size explain further, please. Yeah, for sure. So let's just go back because these are kind of complicated ideas, right, Emily? So let's go back and just I'm gonna go back to the previous slide and we can kind of explain these again just so that we make sure everybody's on the same page.
Okay, so rank size rule, specifically like what the rule states, is the country. So say you're having a country with, it's just the number. I know the n thing can get a little confusing, where it's like the nth number of the settlement and that kind of stuff. So your first biggest city is gonna have, that's the largest city in a country. The second largest city is gonna have half of the population of the first city, and then the third city is going to have a third of the largest city. So it's going to go back to that largest city every time, so that the populations and like the following cities are going to be more closely related to them and not as big of a gap as doubling down every time, like, if that makes more sense.
Yeah, so like really simply it's the idea that like cities that follow this sort of rank size rule are going to be, there's going to be multiple large cities. There's typically going to be a largest city, but the next largest city is going to be still sort of in that same ballpark, right? So like in this case, you might have a city of 1 million. The next largest city might only have 500,000, but that's still a really large city, right? You multiply that times 3 or 4, and all of a sudden we're talking pretty big numbers. And so rank size rule, that just means that like the cities are all generally related to each other in terms of size, right? They are generally speaking kind of could be in the same category, if that makes sense. Whereas with primate city rule, your biggest city doesn't even like the second biggest city compared to the biggest city doesn't even come close, right? So like your biggest city might have 1 million, and if your second biggest city only has, I don't know, 10,000, that would be like primate city rule. The largest city is way overshadows the second largest city. Another example of like of this, you know, typically this shows up in LDCs. A good example that I think about is like Lagos. Lagos is like one of the largest cities in the world, but if you compare the other cities around it, they don't even come close. Okay, we're gonna keep moving on. If we got more questions about this, we'll come back to it at the end.
Okay, now I know that this can definitely be a tricky topic for the AP Human Geo Unit 6. But the first thing to start off understanding this model is knowing what the model assumes. So this theory assumes a flat plane of physical geography conditions. So this does not take into account like if there's mountains, if there's rivers, if there's anything. We're thinking like places that are like completely flat. That's one of the assumptions that the model makes. This also assumes that people will shop at the nearest market that carries what they need. So this will be like they have no preference over like what brand they might like better, because some people might go a different route or a further distance to find some like a brand that they like rather than the one that is closest. And this tries to answer the question of why urban places locate where they do in relation to the markets. So this is used a lot in retail, and it's different than the other models because it's so based on the market and retail. And then two vocab terms that often get confused with this is range and threshold. Range is going to be the maximum distance that customers are prepared to travel to acquire the goods. And then it's the idea that some people will, it's the idea that at some point the cost or the inconvenience will outweigh the need for the good. So they're not going to go that far to go get it. They'll go somewhere else that's closer. Threshold is going to be the minimum market needed to bring about the selling of a particular good or service. So that's going to be like how many people actually want the service to be there. That will put it into the market.
Yeah, and one thing to remember with these sort of graphs that we're looking at, these charts we're looking at, these kind of models, right, is that they are they typically are going to be they're going to be theoretical, meaning that like they are explaining an idea to the sort of maximum degree that it could happen. Like so this is showing how are these settlements set up to kind of most optimally serve customers, right, or serve consumers. Are civilizations and settlements actually set up like this? Maybe to a certain degree, but this is kind of looking at like just sort of theory. And so when we're thinking about theory is never going to be 100% accurate. It's a theory, right? It's sort of like saying this is like the most optimal way that society could be set up to service consumers. And also another thing to remember with a lot of these too is they were made up a long time ago, right? This is almost 100-year-old theory. Civilization has changed a lot since the 1930s. So like that's another thing to keep in mind, right? Technology has changed a lot. So these are definitely just theories.
Something that relates to the central place theory is going to be the gravity model. This model shows the movement of people between the cities as a result of the distance required to travel and the size of the city. So this is going to be like the example that we have here is Chicago is going to attract commuters from a large radius, but at some point, if St. Louis is closer, that's where they're going to go. They're going to go to the closest big city that's available to them. So again, for me, I'm going to way rather go to Minneapolis than I would LA. That is way out of the way for me. I would way rather go somewhere that's going to be closer and worth my time.
Yeah, 100%, right? And again, this is another theory, another sort of idea trying to explain the decision making that people make and how it relates to large cities. But yeah, like another example, I live an hour and a half away from Boston. That's close enough to me where I still feel like I live close to Boston. And a reason for that is because even though I live an hour and a half away, Boston has a lot of the things that I need as a consumer. It has a lot of the stuff that I want to do. There's a massive airport in Boston. There are shows. I'm going to go see Taylor Swift in May in Boston, right? Boston has these things. So for me, I'm so willing to travel an hour and a half to Boston because it has so much. Now, I also live near Keene, New Hampshire. Do you guys know where Keene, New Hampshire is? Have you guys heard of Keene, New Hampshire? Probably not. If I lived an hour and a half away from Keene, I probably wouldn't travel there because it's not a big enough city to attract my attention as a consumer. It's not gonna have Swiftie coming in May, right? That's not gonna happen. But Boston, though, I'm gonna be there, right? And remember, these are all theories, these are all ideas. This is all like trying to explain behavior of people. All right, let's keep moving. I derailed the conversation by bringing up Taylor Swift.
Okay, so this is the part that everyone really loves about Unit 6 for sure. This model, this is a concentric zone model, and while I'm talking about it, if you guys want to go ahead and like try to draw it from memory, see what you can think of, what you can remember, that's a totally good idea. We have the picture of it on the next slide, we can answer this question. How does gravity model relate to central place theory? That's with the idea of threshold, that's going to be the gravity model kind of enforces threshold, how they're willing to go a certain distance for where they're going to go, and they're going to go to the closest one. If that answers that question. Okay, back to the concentric zone model. This model represents the cities expanding rapidly as people move away from inner city locations towards places with a higher standard of living. Again, this model is quite outdated. It's from the 1920s, so this is way before like all of the technology that we have today. And automobiles is a really key thing in all of these models, and it really shows throughout the development of these ones. So this one, they used Chicago as an observation. That's how they developed this around it. And some of the strengths of this model is it was a blueprint for a lot of future models. For example, in the Sub-Saharan Africa city model, you will see a lot of themes, and you will see that this is all of the different pieces that they have in this that are going to be incorporated in a bunch of the different ones. So this one is a really, really, really important one to know for the test. The weaknesses are going to be the lack of applicability beyond the US, and 1900 to 1950 is the only time period that it really applies for, because it doesn't account for a lot of the automobile expansion, and it also does not account for physical geography changes.
Yeah, this is a really, really important model to know, because this is kind of, this really influences the way that we think about cities and modern cities. So this is, really basically, this is just the idea that the city center is the most desirable place to be. It is the CBD, it is the central business district. It is where everything happens in a city. And so that's also the most desirable place to live, right? Everybody wants to live in the CBD. So rent's going to be really expensive. Houses are going to be really expensive. So the poorer parts of that city are going to be on the outside of that city, where it is cheaper because it's less desirable to live there, because there's less stuff going on. This is a theory. Most cities don't actually exist like this. Most cities aren't like this kind of like perfect circle where in the middle it's really desirable and it gets less desirable as you go out. But as Emily said, this doesn't account for cars. Cars throw everything off, right? Cars absolutely change everything. The minute that cars become affordable, right? The minute that everybody starts having a car in the 1950s, things are going to change. But this is a really important one because it is the center of what a lot of models of or city models are based around.
And then I see a question that is asking, is the von Thünen model also the concentric zone model? No, it is not. The von Thünen one deals with agriculture. This is dealing with the layout of the cities. And here is a picture of the model. As you can see, the middle is the central business district. That's going to be where all of like the manufacturing, all the business is going on. Then you're going to have that zone of transition where there's going to be kind of a mix of like manufacturing that's happening on the outside, and there's going to be working class, so kind of more low income residential zones. And then as you can see here, the upper class is on the outside of the cities. So it's kind of more desirable to live further away, but that's more difficult because cars are obviously pretty expensive if they're available to the person. So that's why the upper class they're gonna want to live far away from all the manufacturing and all that kind of stuff. But the transition zone, that one is one of the more difficult ones to understand. That's where housing and manufacturing kind of meets. All right, now we're moving on to 1939, so still not super recent, but this is going to be the Hoyt sector model. This describes the growth of US cities based on economic factors, and it's going to deal with these transportation corridors. So this is the one that looks like all of the pie, the little slices of pie. That's how I remember it. It's really based on the CBD and the factory and industrial sector. The low class, middle class, and high class residential are also parts of these. So this is really just kind of a reworking of the concentric zone model. That's a good way to think about it. And the residential sectors are determined by location relative to your employment. Some of the pros of this model are going to be that the residential sectors can grow outward. So it's not just like one class on each ring in each distance from the center. It's going to be like, as you'll see, like they can really spread out from the concentric zone model. And it doesn't really use the it doesn't really, again, use automobiles as the primary form of transport. It uses other types of transportation for the transportation corridors. But this just, this really applies more than the concentric zone model. As the zone closest to the CBD starts to overpopulate, don't wealthier people want to move? I would say yes, that is true. They would like to move to the suburban areas, especially nowadays. They're obviously, we'll get to more of this stuff, like counter urbanization. That's definitely something that's going on right now, but people have different interests for why they want to move certain places for sure. So here's that picture of it. As you can see, the little pie slices. Again, the themes that we're going to see in a lot of these models is that the factories and the industry are going to be kind of contained within the low-class residential because those are the least desirable parts to live in. And the CBD is connected to the factories and industry. Then we're going to have the middle class kind of surrounding the lower class residential, and the high class residential is going to be completely in the middle of the middle class. And the thing that's really different here is that they all have opportunities to be as close or as far away from the CBD. All of the different classes are able to be close or far from the CBD, but again, remaining with that theme of factories and industries with low class residential.
Yeah, and this is, I really think this is a more accurate picture of what a city actually, even at the time, I think this is what a more accurate picture of what a city looked like. And I think it's still very applicable to today, right? All right, we only got 45 minutes, so we're gonna keep it rocking here.
All right, now we have, this is in 1945, so this is like right after World War II. We have multiple nuclei model. This one describes cities with more than one CBD. This one does recognize the automobile allowed people and jobs to move further away from city centers, so it's not just one center in the middle. They are all like spread out, and they're all different CBDs. That's what a big part of this is. Different economic interests are going to be parts of the multiple nuclei. Some of the strengths of this, again, are going to be the automobile and the road networks that are available in this, and also the flexibility that this allows. Not all of the multiple nuclei models are going to look exactly the same due to all the different economic activities in cities. And one of the weaknesses is that it fails to explain the development of slums and informal settlements. And again, that kind of goes with the theme of none of the other ones could do that before either, but it's just no model is going to be exactly perfect or applicable to like a common like everyday city. That's why it's hard to find like an example city that's going to follow this perfectly. And again, this is an old model for sure.
Definitely.
All right, here's a picture. As we can see, again, the theme of the low-class residential around light manufacturing, and the light blue here you can see is heavy manufacturing. And here we can also see that the residential suburb is starting to kind of drift away more from other outlying business districts. Some of them will have still like one main just central business district, but then these other outlying ones are going to be different economic kind of things. And we also see the industrial suburbs starting to move away from a lot of the residential areas. But again, keeping with that theme of low class residential is going to be in the manufacturing zones.
Awesome. So we do have a break lined up. We also only have 40 minutes left. So do we want to take a quick break, or do we want to just keep rocking? Because we are running out of time here. Let's see All right, chat. I see. Yes, yes. My brain feels more and more melted. Well, that's never good. Yeah. Let's take. How about this? We'll compromise. Let's do like a 1.5 minute break, and then we'll rock and roll. How does that sound? By the time I set a poll up, it's going to be 1.5 minutes. Play. Quick little brain break. Let's just like center ourselves. Find ourselves in the city center. Find ourselves in whichever model we prefer. Which model just really spoke to us. You can find yourself there. Centered in the city. Are you in New York City? Are you in Chicago? Are you in Boston? I'm in Boston right now. I'm looking at the Fenway sign, just really taking it all in. It's beautiful. I hear somebody yelling at somebody else, as happens in Boston. Fights breaking out on the street. That happens sometimes. It's a crazy city. Boston really is fantastic. All right, let's do like another 30 seconds. All right. And we have achieved our city center. Let's go.
All right, back to the fun stuff. This is definitely a more recent model. So those were kind of like the more older and like outdated kind of models. This is going to be a little bit more recent. But again, no city is going to follow this exactly. So the Galactic city is going to describe it's going to describe the entire continental US as an urban area that extends along interstates. This is really going to revolve around like a belt around the city that is made of like interstate and really accounts for transportation in this one. There's even like an airport little like thing designation in this one, which I think is really interesting. This one really grew with the advent of the automobiles, and people can it also really accounts for people commuting to work and working from home for sure. One of the cons for this is it doesn't really apply for rural areas, and you'll see that there's a lot of just kind of empty space in the model. Yeah, so again, we have just like, it's completely different than all the other ones, and it kind of looks like a planet, like the ring around it kind of looks like Saturn, if that helps you remember the Galactic city model. And as you can see, like it accounts for like an office park, and it kind of like has a lot more service-based economy stuff rather than just industrial.
Yeah, I saw I think it was Averill in chat that said Houston is a really good example of this. Yeah, totally. A lot of these big, I don't know why I always think about Texas, maybe because big cities and like everything's bigger in Texas. But I know Houston is a really good example of this. It's really big, it's really sprawling. You need a car to kind of get everywhere. And that's another big part of these cities too, is as Emily said, they are big, right? And they are really only connected by this highway that surrounds it, which is why it's galactic, right? It's a circle.
All right, now we're getting to more specific, like regional, worldwide cities. So this is going to be the Latin American city model. This one is going to be used to describe Latin American cities, and this one is really key for showing rapid urbanization. One of the key parts of this too is going to be the commercial spine, and this shows the effects of rapid urbanization, and it really accounts for slums. This there's a lot of informal housing, like kind of like the favelas in Brazil. That is a really good example of all of the different things. And I read something earlier that said that 10% of the world's population lives in like these squatter settlements in the slums, And so that really puts it into perspective of how important it is to include this into an urban model. And also it really accounts for like colonialism and the historical context of Latin America as well. So here we have the picture. You can see the commercial spine and all of the different, the number 4, the purple color, that's going to be the elite housing that is kind of next to the commercial spine. And then like the number 1, you can see here the influences of all the different types of the concentric zone model and the Hoyt sector. You can kind of see like the concentric rings and the different sectors too. I think that's really nice to think of them kind of together in this sense. And now getting to the Sub-Saharan Africa model, this is the most defining characteristic of this is going to be the 3 different CBDs. So there's the colonial, traditional, and market zone CBDs. These are going to be really heavily influenced on historical events that have happened in Africa. And it's going to also incorporate elements of the concentric zone model. And this one was published in 1977. So this one's a little bit more recent, with the Latin American one being published in 1945. But still, this isn't really going to apply perfectly to any city. That's one of the, like, again, none of these account for physical geography. I know in a lot of FRQs, they'll ask, like, what are downfalls and what are, like, positives of these models. So it is definitely good to know, like, the physical geography part is really never applied for if there's, like, mountains or rivers or any of that kind of stuff. So here again, we can see the both the sector and the concentric zone model together with the 3 CBDs, the colonial, traditional, and market zone. I think that's really interesting because you can see like kind of how it is split up around that, and the ethnic neighborhoods are around the 3 CBDs.
Yeah, this is a really interesting model. Definitely like the history part of my brain is like, this is like so interesting because it really is a combination of just all of these different historical events culminating in the city model. You think about an African city that has these deep-rooted historical elements to it, but then it has colonial elements and European influence elements. Now we're in this kind of post-colonial modern era that is also influencing it too. So it is just really, really interesting. One of the things I'm seeing in chat a lot that I just kind of want to offer a little suggestion. So a lot of you guys are asking about specific words. Google is your friend here. If you see a word you don't recognize, Googling it will get it answered for you faster than any of the hosts will. Okay. So if you see a word and you're like, I don't know what that means, just put it into Google. 2 seconds, you'll have your answer. And then if you're like, I don't know how this word relates to what we're talking about, that's when we can go into more detail. Okay. Yeah, that's a really, I just saw a really good tip. Just having a good understanding of what each depicts is a really good tip, right? Like you don't need to memorize absolutely everything, right? Like Emily, how would you suggest like you learn about these different models?
Me personally, I would just think about like really thinking about the different like what it looks like. That's like not necessarily even knowing like which like, oh, number 1 on this model means this, all of that kind of stuff. Just like thinking of the shapes and the general idea of the model. That's why I always think of like the pie shape or like the circles. That really helps me think about all of that kind of stuff. And I know something that we did was we took time during class to like go outside and draw these with chalk. Sometimes it just like doing something creative and kind of weird like that just helps it stick into my head a lot more. So I would definitely recommend doing something like that. And just like, again, you really don't need to know like the exact specifics of every single little model. Just like having a general idea of them is really helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. It's actually, I mean, it's proven that your brain is going to retain information more when it is creating something, right? So whether you're drawing it on a piece of paper or you're drawing it out on the sidewalk with chalk, drawing these out, it's going to help you remember them better. It's going to help you understand them better. That's a great tip, Emily.
All right, this is our last model. This is going to be the Southeast Asian model. This one is usually built around a port, not really a traditional CBD. The port can act kind of as a CBD, but it's not a very it's not as it's seen in the same light as a traditional one. Again, this was seen as a historical colonial port. And it is again heavily influenced by the historical context of the region. And this one also has a lot of like other nations kind of influence on it and that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of different commercial zones with other countries and a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so here we have the example. You can see the port zone. And this one is really a lot of a combination of both. It's literally like one pie slice and then the rings. Sometimes that just really helps me divide them up, is just trying to find that general one. And I would say that these three are probably, not that they're the least important to know, but I would say prioritize the first four. Those ones that are more applicable to like the US, and that's easier. If you ever got to like choose a model to describe, I would definitely choose one that you know the most about and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good tip for taking the AP exam. And I know that this is probably y'all's first, for some of y'all, this is probably your first AP exam, right? Emily, was this your first AP exam?
Yes, this was.
Yeah. And what the AP exam, what they want you to do is they want you to get familiar with big ideas and then have that evidence to support those big ideas. And so oftentimes for the FRQs, they're going to ask you to use examples that you know about, right? So they might ask you about these different city models and then get you to give evidence using specific city models, but you get to choose what that evidence is, right? And so, that is a general AP thing. College Board for a lot of the humanities classes likes doing that, right? So for those of you that are thinking maybe you're taking AP European history or AP US history at some point in your high school career, it's the exact same thing. You don't need to remember absolutely every single enlightened thinker for AP European history, but you need to know a few of them because you got to have evidence. The same thing for AP Human Geo, right? Have that evidence bank in your brain that you can kind of pull into and pull from.
All right, now we have the bid rent theory. This is going to deal with the price of land as you move further from the central business district. So this one's not really going to like relate to many of the other ones. The one that it most likely probably resonates with is the concentric zone model, but I would not try to link these two together. I would try to think of it as a completely different thing. So this one, as you move further away from the CBD, the cheaper the land is going to get. And also the way that in which the land is used is also going to change. It really impacts the way that cities are laid out. And when you're in like the more urban areas, you're going to expand vertically because the land is going to be more expensive. So you're going to want to build on a smaller plot and build more further up as it's going to be less expensive. And then outside of those really urban areas, that's going to be a lot of more like expansion horizontally. So you're going to have like more like family homes and that kind of stuff. As the population density changes as well, the cost and availability of land will also change. High density, there's going to be a lot less available land, but there's going to be a higher demand for the land, especially in like economic ventures. You're going to want to have your business. You're not going to want to have your business like way out where there's like no market and that kind of stuff. You're going to want to put it into more densely populated areas to have the furthest reach to the market that you can have. So here again, you can see the retail, like how retail really, like residential has a really long zone here, but retail kind of stops closer to the CBD because that's where the bigger markets are.
And can you just explain a little bit more, Emily, what does it mean that residential has this really long, low line leading from the CBD to the outside?
Okay, so that's going to mean that there's going to be residential in the CBD. That's some people are going to live there, but they're also going to live even further from the city. So residential is going to be like all the way like throughout the urban area or the urban and rural areas. whereas retail is going to be a lot more focused in the more urban areas. That's a good way to think about the difference, and manufacturing is kind of going to be in the mix of the two.
Got it. So residential, it's more spread out, more like residents are going to live, from the CBD, they're going to live further and further away than you might see like manufacturing, which is going to be closer to the CBD. Got it.
All right, now this is we're done with all the models, so woohoo. We're gonna get to urban sprawl. This is the unrestricted growth of outside of the major urban areas. This is caused by a lot of population growth, and it ultimately leads to suburbanization. I know a lot of people use urban sprawl and suburbanization interchangeably. This really changes the landscape as housing is built. Here you can see in this picture, this is Las Vegas, kind of how it's expanded. I think it's gone somewhere from 200,000 people to almost like 2 million in the span of maybe 20 to 30 years. And so that obviously is going to have a lot of impacts on the natural landscape and just the overall cultural landscape of a city as well.
Yeah, urban sprawl is really interesting. It's typically associated with newer cities as well, right? I would say less historically large cities. So like a city like Los Angeles is a really good example. It was not always a really big city, as Emily said. It was a smaller city until it sort of grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. Unlike New York City, where New York City, you might make the argument there's some urban sprawl that's happening there, but New York City is way more compacted together than a place like Los Angeles. You live in Los Angeles, you have to have a car, pretty much. You live in New York City, you don't have to have a car. It's more compacted together.
And then something that cities try to do to stop this urban sprawl is they'll try to put green belts in their cities. This was an idea that was first proposed in London, and these are usually protected from development by different policies and legislation. So the government is stepping in to be like, hey, we can't overdevelop this because we need a little bit of fresh air sometimes. A good example of this is the Golden Horseshoe Greenbelt in Ontario. And this will obviously it can help to improve air quality, and it really tries to preserve like that open space and the natural habitats of a big city. And then the census is also something that is used a lot in collecting urban data, where people can, this is also how they can get information for like green belts and stuff, and just get like the general idea of like how everyone is feeling and like kind of like the makeup of a city. And this will be really important when we go into our next few topics.
And so one of the things in the United States, it's collected every 10 years. We just did the census 3 years ago in 2020, and it's this really interesting time in the United States where people will just show up at your door and they're like, "Hey, I need to find out information about you," and you answer these questions. But this is really important for a lot of different reasons, but especially when we're thinking about urban and suburban development.
All right, now we're going to get to a lot of the challenges of urban changes. So one of these major challenges is redlining. This is the practice of withholding financial loans and services to residents in urban neighborhoods, usually based off of race, religion, or other factors. This can lead to segregation, income inequality, and financial discrimination. These practices, even though they began after the Civil War, they weren't outlawed until 1968, but the effects are still felt here today. Obviously, the generational wealth that is not able to be made up in however many years it has been outlawed. And a really interesting resource, if you're looking to learn more about this, is the University of Minnesota. They have a project where it's called Mapping Prejudice, where they're gathering data of like previously redlined areas, and it's really, really interesting for me to look at, especially as someone who lives in Minnesota.
Yeah, this is a really interesting concept because, obviously in this case we're talking about cities, we're talking about housing, but think about, I think this is something good to think about when we think about segregation in the United States too, right? And we know that with segregation in the United States, segregation is illegal in the United States. However, it still does exist to some degree in some areas. And I think it's the same thing with like redlining, right? Where this practice is illegal, but the effects of it are still really, really, really evident. And we're trying to understand those effects, right? Like Emily said, we have this, it's the University of Minnesota that's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really important for us to know. How is this impacting our community?
And then another thing that can contribute to this, we're still feeling the effects from this today as well. This will be the practice of blockbusting, which is practices by real estate agents to induce panic of selling white-owned housing to minorities. This was really something that real estate agencies used to really try to benefit from high property turnover rates. They would try to like spur white flight. And again, the effects are still here that are felt today. They tried to basically scare white homeowners that minorities were moving into their neighborhood and that was going to decrease the property value, when in reality that was not true. And they would sell their houses for a lower rate than they would have if they didn't have this fear in them. So then the real estate agencies made a lot of money off of that.
Yeah, and this idea of white flight is something you'll learn more about when you take for those that are United States residents, when you take U.S. history at some point, you'll learn about white flight, and it's this idea that white homeowners were scared of African American, Latino American residents moving into their neighborhood. It was spurred on by a lot of different things, blockbusting. This idea that they were being told that the values of their home was going to decline when minorities moved into their neighborhood. But it was also very much this racism that was prevalent, especially during the 1900s. But I mean, white flight is still something that happens today. Again, these effects are things that still happen today.
And then another thing, again, that still happens today is gentrification. This is when middle to upper class individuals move into traditionally working class areas in a city. They renovate or build homes and businesses that raise property values. But unfortunately, this also increases the rent prices that can make housing too expensive for the original working class tenants, and it really leads to displacement of the original residents. So this can really, again, get rid of a lot of affordable housing in the cities, which is really unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
And our last slide for Unit 6 is about squatter settlements. These are again seen in a lot of LDCs, especially the favelas in Brazil. That is a really key example to know for the AP test. These form in response to limitations in affordable housing and also limitations of employment in cities. These provide houses for those in need, but they are not optimal living conditions at all. They are often very makeshift settlements. And again, they really occur in those meta cities that are also in the primate cities. That also ties together a lot of those vocab words that we learned earlier.
Yeah, totally. This is something we've sort of been talking about since you and I got on, right? It was about we've used the word squatter settlements quite a bit. Yeah, and this definitely ties into these massive cities, right? The meta cities, the cities where there are just millions upon millions of people. And like you said, I mean, Emily, do we really have like squatter settlements and we'll use the United States because we're both from the United States. Do we typically have like squatter settlements in MDCs like the United States?
Nope.
Yeah. Typically not, right? Typically these are going to be in what we would consider LDCs or less developed countries. And these are typically going to be in these cities that we would also consider primate cities, right? Cities that are massively big compared to other large cities.
And then here we have some big ideas. If anyone has any questions on these, that we can answer some of those. And these are just reminders of what we talked about during this Unit 6 portion.
Yeah, and so we can hit any of these. We do have about 15 minutes left. Emily, do we have a quiz at the end of this?
Yes, we do. I can send you the link.
Okay. All right, let's do the quiz. Let's do the quiz. It looks like people want the quiz. So we're going to skip the break. We don't have time. Let's do that quiz. Okay. I am going to share my screen. Boom. Share. Right. Let me copy. Paste. Boom. All right. And guys, I know this is a lot. I know that it's like, you know, we've been hammering a lot of content, and yeah, I mean, you know, this is kind of the reality of what we're doing, right? We're cramming, we're getting as much stuff in as we possibly can, and we just kind of gotta do this thing, right? Oh, emojis are cruising. I'll put the link in chat again. I posted it up there, but it got lost. There's the link again. We be cruising. I wish I could pin the chat. That would be a cool feature. Like a pin a message in chat. That would be a super feature. Man, the emojis are flying. I love it. All right, let's go ahead. 157 people. I think it's time to get on. I think it's time to rock. Right, so when a population map shows high concentration, clearly black and clearly white neighborhoods separated from road and central cities, this best represents the impact of a history of what? I don't know why I can't hear the music, but it sounds like everybody else can. So that's... All right, yep, the truthful answer. Yeah, redlining. So remember, this is showing a history of segregation, right? Emily, do you want to explain this one a little more?
Yeah, so this one is gonna say like a lot of neighborhoods that are separated. That's gonna really be the redlining right there. Is that because that kind of in the name of like redlining, like it's lining the neighborhoods. That's and like a lot of that went back to like the laws that and like the different codes that enabled redlining, and so then that's what I would say would be helpful to know for that one.
Yeah, and I see a lot of people that are saying white flight, right? And yeah, that's another term we learned. But the thing to remember is that on the AP exam, you might see two answers that look really like you're like, oh no, these could both be right. And what you need to remember is that you need to choose the answer that is most correct. What is the answer that is most correct here? Well, it's redlining because it talks about a separation, right? A history of separation between these two communities. It's not talking about a history of one community moving away from another. In that case, it might be white flight, but a history of separation. Let's go to the next question. All right. 5-borough has gone through blank, a process defined by changes in population and an increase in property of values, because of which some residents were forced to move out as they cannot afford to live there anymore. What do we think? Man, I wish I could hear the music. Why can't I hear the music? I'm very disappointed. I'm very disappointed. I'll figure it out. All right, let's reveal the answer. Yeah, it's gentrification. Nice job, guys. Yeah, so gentrification, right? This is when pricey things move in, and so it forces people out because they can no longer afford to live there, right? Once the expensive coffee shops and the boutique fashion places move in, rent gets expensive. World cities do not blank modern cities. Or modern culture. But saying the word cities way too much, Emily. World cities do not blank modern culture. I love all the dancing emojis. All right, I'm going to reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. They do not reduce modern culture. Emily, what does this mean? You guys did awesome on this one, by the way.
So this one is one of those examples of making sure you see the not in the question. There's going to be like, sometimes that can be tricky and you need to slow down and read them, because world cities diffuse, promote, and maintain modern culture. And so for me personally, I definitely need to learn how to slow down when I take my multiple choice and look at it, because I think sometimes it can be just seeing that word not, because the world cities, they do all of the other three, which I can see it can get confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's so easy. You know, you're taking the AP exam, you're like 20 multiple choice questions in, you're starting to you're like, oh my God, my brain. It's at that point that you need to take a deep breath and say, I need to read the questions. I need to read the answers, because if I don't, I'm going to mess up. Make sure you are reading the questions in their fullest, reading all the answers. Got to do your due diligence. All right, let's go. A mega city must have a population of at least what? It's just a good vocab term definition. All right, 3, 2, 1, reveal. 10 million. Nice.
Nice.
Great work. Yeah, remember, I loved that. You see Meta City, you see the T in Meta City, you should think 20. So Mega City, you should think 10. All right, smaller settlements have blank services and will blank on large settlements. Remember to read the question carefully, read all the answers carefully. Yeah, Madison, that's correct. Mega is 10, meta is 20 million. right, 3, 2, 1, reveal. Yep. Oh, nice.
Nice.
There we go, right? Smaller settlements have less services and will depend on larger settlements. All right, the city that is twice as large as the next largest city in the country is called a what? We use this word a lot tonight. All right, 3, 2, 1, let's reveal. It is a primate city. There we go. Y'all are crushing it. I just gotta say, y'all are doing a really good job. So Emily, give us the TLDR of a primate city. Give us the really quick overview.
Primate cities are going to be those ones that are found in LDCs where they are exponentially greater than the other cities in the country. So it's going to be the biggest country or the biggest city in a country by far.
Yeah. Yeah. So use the example of like Paris in France. Paris is way bigger than the next biggest city, even though it's in an MDC. I think it's still a pretty good example. All right, let's go. What model besides Latin America has a high-class residential ray or spine from the CBD? Oh, this one's tough. All right, 3, 2, 1. Hey, there we go. Hoyt sector model. That's 64%. That's pretty good. Yeah, let's so let's see, we got 4 minutes left. Let's go to the next one. So blank occurs when low density single family homes expand into farmland outside of a city limits. All right, let's go. 3, 2, 1, reveal. Nice. Urban sprawl. Urban sprawl. Nice job. All right. Green belts promote link. I'm cruising now. All right, 3, 2, 1, review. Nice, sustainable land use. All right, we got one more for our Unit 6 review. Which of the following terms is the odd one out? What does not make sense here? Tricky one to end it. All right, 3, 2, 1, let's go. CBD. Emily, you want to explain this one really quick?
Yeah, so the favela, the barriera, and the disability sector, those are all going to be those squatter settlements. Those are just different names for them when they're found in different regions of the world, and then the central business district is going to be where the commerce and the market and all of that kind of stuff is happening. So just like looking, and then even a strategy for this is just like looking at like, if I see like I know what the disamenity sector is and the favela, I'm going to look at those and be like, okay, well, I know that those two are similar, so I'm going to look for the one that's the odd one out. That's what I would do if I didn't know what the other term was.
Yep, totally. That's really good advice. Yeah, and remember, even though these might not be like the exact AP style multiple choice questions, this is still really good practice for just reviewing content. But this is also really good practice because a lot of the skills we're using here, we're going to be able to use on those questions anyway. Okay. Really quick before you guys get out of here, we do have a night 3 survey. It is that big green button at the bottom of your screen. If you guys could please fill that out before you head out, that would be lovely. I would really appreciate it. Emily, this has been a lot of fun. I've had a really good time talking about city models with you. We'll be back here tomorrow, folks. Is it already night 4 tomorrow? Oh my Lord, it's already night 4 tomorrow. You guys have been awesome. Thank your hosts. Post in the chat. You guys crushed it. Chat, always a pleasure. We'll see you guys tomorrow night. Okay?